The night before a wedding is supposed to be magical. A flurry of last-minute details, the air brimming with excitement, and maybe even a little nervous laughter between the bride and groom. But that wasn't how it happened for me. Instead, it was the night my entire world unraveled. It started innocuously enough. I was at home, tucked under a pile of ribbons and tulle, carefully assembling the final touches for tomorrow's ceremony. My best friend, Claire, sat across from me, sipping champagne and teasing me about my obsessive attention to detail. You know, she laughed, pointing at the place cards I was painstakingly arranging, no one's going to care that their name is perfectly centered. I smiled but didn't respond. My mind was elsewhere, on him. Matt had been unusually quiet all day. I'd chalked it up to pre-wedding jitters, but something gnawed at me. The texts were shorter. His responses more clipped. And then there was the last-minute bachelor party his best man, Adam, had insisted on throwing. I trust him, I told Claire, though I think I was trying to convince myself more than her. She tilted her head sympathetically, but a flicker of doubt passed over her face. Later that evening, I decided to call Matt, just to hear his voice. He picked up after a few rings, his tone cheerful but strained. In the background, I could hear laughter and clinking glasses. It sounded normal enough, but something about the way he answered felt off. Just calling to say goodnight, I said lightly, hoping to mask the unease I couldn't quite shake. Good night, babe. Love you, he replied. But there was a beat, just a second too long, before the words came out. The unease grew as the night wore on. It wasn't like me to pry, but something inside wouldn't let me sleep. So, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened his location on my phone. We'd shared it for safety reasons back when we first started dating, and I'd all but forgotten about it. When I saw the address, my heart stopped. It wasn't the hotel where the bachelor party was supposed to be. It was an apartment, a familiar one. One I'd been to before, years ago, back when she was still in his life. Erica. I stared at the screen, my breath caught in my chest. Erica's address glared back at me like a red flag in the dark. I tried to reason with myself, it could be innocent. Maybe Adam had a friend who lived there. Maybe Matt had taken a wrong turn. But the pit in my stomach knew better. Claire's voice cut through the silence. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I hesitated, holding up the phone so she could see. He's at Erica's apartment. Her face fell instantly, her brow knitting into a deep frown. No. No way. That doesn't mean anything, right? I mean, maybe. Her voice trailed off, and even she couldn't finish the sentence without sounding unconvincing. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. I need to go. What? No, no, no. Claire jumped to her feet, practically knocking over her glass. You can't just show up there. I grabbed my keys, my hands trembling. What am I supposed to do, Claire? Sit here and pretend it's nothing? Go to bed and wake up tomorrow to marry a man who, my voice cracked, and I stopped, afraid that saying it aloud would make it real. Claire softened, stepping closer. Let's think this through. What if it's a misunderstanding? Do you really want to walk into something you can't unsee? But that was the thing, I already knew. Deep down, I felt it. The kind of bone-deep certainty you don't want to admit, but it's there, undeniable. I swallowed the lump in my throat and looked at her. I have to know. Claire sighed heavily, then grabbed her coat. Fine. I'm coming with you. The drive was a blur, my mind racing with every possible scenario. Claire sat in tense silence beside me, her presence the only thing keeping me from breaking down. When we pulled up to the building, I killed the engine and just sat there. What's the plan? Claire asked, her voice soft but firm. I don't know, I admitted. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly they hurt. The lights were on in Erica's apartment. I could see the faint glow spilling out from behind her thin curtains. Shadows moved inside, two figures. One was tall and broad-shouldered. The other was slender, her silhouette unmistakable. "I can't do this," I whispered. But as soon as the words left my mouth, the door to the apartment opened. I froze, sinking lower into my seat. Matt stepped out onto the small landing, shirt untucked, hair slightly mussed, as if he hadn't bothered to fix it. Erica appeared a moment later, standing in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame. My heart shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces. Claire sucked in a breath beside me. Oh my God. I wanted to look away, to unsee what was unfolding in front of me, but I couldn't. Erica laughed, soft and flirtatious, then reached out and touched Matt's arm. It was so casual, so familiar, like it was something they'd done 100 times before. And maybe they had. Matt didn't pull away. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he leaned in closer, his hand brushing against her hip. She said something I couldn't hear, and then, before I could process it, she kissed him. It wasn't a quick peck. It wasn't the kind of kiss you could dismiss as friendly. It was long, slow, and deliberate. And he kissed her back. I felt like I was watching myself from outside my body, like I wasn't really there. Everything went quiet, except for the sound of blood rushing in my ears. Claire's hand was on my arm. "Let's go. Now." But I didn't move. Not until Matt pulled back and disappeared inside, the door shutting behind him. That's when the first tear fell. "Drive, please," I whispered. My voice barely worked. Claire didn't hesitate. She reached over, started the car, and pulled away. I didn't even look back. I don't remember much of the ride home. My brain was stuck on a loop, replaying the image of Matt and Erica together, each time more unbearable than the last. By the time Claire parked in my driveway, I felt hollow. "Do you want me to stay?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "I just need to be alone." She hesitated, her eyes filled with concern, but eventually nodded. "Okay. Call me if you need anything." "Anything." I nodded, and she squeezed my hand before leaving. As soon as the door shut behind her, I collapsed onto the floor, sobbing into my hands. How could he? How could he throw away everything we had, everything we were about to become, for her? I thought back to all the promises he'd made, the vows we were supposed to exchange tomorrow. How long had this been going on? Was it just tonight? Or had she been lingering in the background, waiting for the perfect moment to come back and ruin everything? By the time the sun rose, I was still sitting there, my wedding dress hanging silently in the corner of the room. It felt like it belonged to someone else now, someone naive enough to believe in forever. But not me. Not anymore. Morning arrived like a cruel joke, sunlight streaming through my window, mocking the wreckage of the night before. My phone was buzzing incessantly on the coffee table, vibrating against the wood like an angry bee. I ignored it. I couldn't bring myself to answer, especially not the calls from him. Instead, I stared at my wedding dress, still draped delicately on its hanger, as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Claire burst through the door without knocking, her face a mixture of panic and determination. "All right," she said, slamming the door shut behind her, "we need a game plan." I stared at her blankly. Game plan? Yes, a game plan. Because it's your wedding day, and, she stopped herself mid-sentence, taking in my disheveled state and red, swollen eyes. Scratch that. It's not your wedding day. It's the day we fix this mess and make you feel human again. Her words didn't land right away. My head felt foggy, my body heavy, like I'd been trapped underwater all night. "Claire," I said finally, my voice cracking, "what am I supposed to do? Everyone's expecting me to walk down the aisle in a few hours." She sat down next to me, her hand gripping mine. "Listen to me. You don't owe anyone anything, not him, not the guests, not the caterers, no one. You get to decide what happens today. You're in control." Control. The word felt foreign, almost laughable. How could I be in control of anything when my life had just exploded? What if I just don't show up? I whispered. Claire grinned like I just suggested we rob a bank. Now we're talking. An hour later, I was sitting at my kitchen table in Claire's oversized sweatshirt and a pair of leggings, staring at the RSVP list. Every name felt like another weight on my shoulders. Friends. Family. Coworkers. People who had flown in from other states, all expecting to witness the happiest day of my life. What about my parents? I asked, glancing up at Claire, who was pacing the kitchen like a woman on a mission. They'll understand, she said firmly. Trust me, they love you more than anything. The only person who's going to be mad about this is Matt, and he can choke on his regret for all I care. Her confidence was bolstering, but it didn't make the decision any easier. The idea of facing my parents, explaining what had happened, made my stomach churn. But the thought of standing at the altar, pretending everything was fine, was even worse. My phone buzzed again, and this time, I glanced at the screen. It was a text from Matt. Hey, babe. Call me when you're awake. Missed you last night. Can't wait to see you today. I felt the bile rise in my throat. The audacity of it. The sheer gall to act like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just destroyed us hours before we were supposed to say, I do. Do you want me to text him? Claire offered, eyeing my phone like it was a bomb about to go off. I shook my head, my jaw tightening. No. I'll deal with him. By noon, the venue was bustling with activity. The florist was setting up arrangements, the caterers were prepping hors d'oeuvres, and the officiant had already arrived. But I wasn't there. Instead, I was sitting in a coffee shop across town, a baseball cap pulled low over my face, Claire by my side. We'd sent an emergency text to my parents and Matt's, explaining that the wedding was off and that they'd learn more soon. My mom had called immediately, her voice full of concern, but she hadn't pushed for details. She just said she'd handle the guests. What about the venue? I asked Claire, stirring my untouched latte. Do I call them and explain? Or just disappear? Disappear, Claire said without hesitation. You don't owe them an explanation, and you definitely don't owe him one. If he wants answers, he can figure it out on his own. I nodded, though the guilt still gnawed at me. Somewhere, Matt was probably standing in a room full of groomsmen, putting on a tuxedo, smiling at jokes, blissfully unaware that I wasn't coming. Would he panic when he realized? Would he even care? I wish I could be there to see his face, Claire muttered, almost as if reading my mind. Can you imagine? The guy thinks he's getting away with everything, and then boom, no bride. The thought was satisfying, but only for a moment. Then the sadness crept back in. This was supposed to be my day, our day, and instead, it was unraveling like a bad sitcom. By early afternoon, the texts from Matt had shifted. The cheerful, casual tone was gone, replaced by confusion. Hey, where are you? Everything okay? Then. Babe, seriously, call me. People are starting to ask questions. Finally. What the hell, Amy? If you're not here in 20 minutes, I'm coming to find you. I stared at the messages, my emotions swinging between anger and heartbreak. Part of me wanted to reply, to confront him, to lay everything out and watch him squirm. But the other part, the smarter part, knew better. He didn't deserve an explanation. Not after what I'd seen. Claire grabbed the phone from my hands and typed out a single response before I could stop her. You know what you did. She hit send and set the phone down with a triumphant grin. There. Now he can sit with that for a while. I wanted to argue, but I didn't have the energy. Instead, I sank back into my seat and closed my eyes, letting the sounds of the bustling cafe drown out the chaos in my head. The wedding was over before it had even begun. But the reckoning was only just starting. The hours crawled by, each one heavier than the last. By the time I got home, the adrenaline had drained out of me, leaving behind a hollow ache that settled deep in my chest. Claire had stayed with me for most of the day, helping field calls from family and friends, but now I was alone again, and the silence in the house felt deafening. My phone buzzed on the counter, and I flinched instinctively. Another text from Matt. This one was different, shorter, colder. We need to talk. Call me. For a moment, I stared at the message, debating what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore him forever, to ghost him and let him rot in the mess he'd made. But another part, the part still clinging to some shred of the person I used to be, wanted answers. Needed them. Before I could second-guess myself, I picked up the phone and called him. He answered almost immediately. "Amy," he said, his voice tight. "What the hell is going on?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "You tell me." "What are you talking about?" he snapped. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this has been? I've been standing here in front of everyone, waiting for my bride to show up, and instead, I get a cryptic text and nothing else. You can't just..." "Stop," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. "Don't you dare try to make this about you." There was a pause, and I could hear him breathing on the other end, his anger barely contained. "I deserve an explanation." I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, you want an explanation? Fine. Let's talk about where you were last night." Silence. I pressed on, the words tumbling out like a dam had broken. "I saw you, Matt. At Erica's apartment. I saw the two of you together. So don't sit there and act like you're the victim." For a moment, he didn't say anything. And then, finally, he sighed. "Amy, it's not what you think." I clenched my jaw so tightly it hurt. "Don't you dare say that to me. I saw you. You kissed her." "It was a mistake," he said quickly, his voice desperate now. "I don't even know why it happened. I was drunk, I wasn't thinking." "And that's supposed to make it better?" I snapped. "Do you think that changes anything? You slept with her, didn't you?" There was another pause, longer this time, and in that silence, I got my answer. "Yes," he admitted finally, his voice barely above a whisper. But it didn't mean anything. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My stomach turned, and for a moment, I thought I might actually be sick. "It didn't mean anything?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "It meant enough for you to risk everything. It meant enough for you to betray me the night before our wedding." "I didn't plan for it to happen," he said, his tone defensive now. "It was a stupid, impulsive thing. I regretted it the second it was over." I closed my eyes, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill over. "How long?" I asked quietly. "What? How long has it been going on, Matt?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Was it just last night, or has it been happening this whole time?" He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "It wasn't the first time," I said, more to myself than to him. "How could you? How could you look me in the eyes and lie to me, over and over again, while you were sneaking around with her?" "It's not like that," he said quickly. "It's not like we were having some long affair. She reached out a few months ago, and look, I was stupid, okay? I messed up. But I chose you, Amy. I was going to marry you." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and hollow. "You chose me? That's your excuse? You were going to marry me, so I'm supposed to overlook the fact that you were sleeping with your ex-girlfriend?" "It was over," he insisted. "It ended weeks ago. Last night was a mistake." "Stop calling it a mistake," I snapped. "You don't get to call it that. You knew exactly what you were doing." His voice hardened. "And what about you, huh? You're not exactly blameless here. You didn't even bother to show up today. Do you know how humiliating it's been to stand there in front of everyone while they're all whispering about me?" My blood boiled. "Humiliating for you? You humiliated yourself, Matt. You're the one who threw everything away. Don't try to blame me for the consequences of your actions." There was a long silence, both of us too angry to speak. Finally, he sighed. So, what happens now? I felt a strange calm settle over me, like I'd been treading water in a storm and had finally given up the fight. What happens now, I said slowly, is that I'm done. Amy. No, I cut him off. We're done. There's no coming back from this. He started to say something, but I ended the call before I could hear it. For a long moment, I sat there staring at the phone, my chest heaving with the weight of everything that had just happened. And then, for the first time all day, I felt a flicker of something that almost resembled relief. The hours after my conversation with Matt felt surreal. I kept expecting to wake up, for it all to have been some bizarre, cruel dream. But no amount of pinching myself could undo the reality. My fiancé had betrayed me, and our life together was over before it even began. I stayed in bed the next morning, cocooned in my blankets, too emotionally drained to move. My phone buzzed sporadically on the nightstand, texts and missed calls from family, friends, and even a few curious acquaintances who didn't know better than to pry. I ignored all of it. I couldn't face the questions, the pity, or the inevitable whispers about what really happened. But by midday, I realized I couldn't hide forever. People were going to need answers, and I owed them at least some explanation, especially my parents. My mom answered on the first ring. Amy. Thank God. Are you okay, sweetheart? The concern in her voice nearly undid me. I gripped the phone tighter, trying to keep the lump in my throat at bay. I'm fine, Mom. You don't sound fine, she said gently. Do you want me to come over? Your dad and I can be there in an hour. No, I'm okay, I lied. I needed some space. I couldn't go through with it. Her silence on the other end spoke volumes. She was giving me the time to elaborate, but when I didn't, she finally asked, did something happen with Matt? Tears welled up in my eyes, and I blinked them away. He wasn't who I thought he was. Oh, honey, she said softly. I'm so sorry. Whatever he did, he doesn't deserve you. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Thanks, Mom. We talked a little longer, her words soothing and her reassurances exactly what I needed. She promised to handle the calls from extended family and guests, to smooth over the inevitable awkwardness with as much grace as possible. I didn't have the energy to deal with anyone else, but knowing she had my back lifted a small weight off my shoulders. Claire came by that afternoon, armed with takeout and a bottle of wine. Your survival kit, she announced, setting the bags on the counter. Thai food, cheap Merlot, and me. Let's wallow. I couldn't help but smile at her determination. I don't deserve you. You deserve better than that cheating garbage heap you almost married, she shot back. We settled onto the couch, the coffee table littered with half-empty cartons of pad thai and spring rolls. Claire poured us each a glass of wine and raised hers in a mock toast. To dodging bullets, she said. I clinked my glass against hers. And to best friends who saved the day. For the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed, a real, genuine laugh. That night, I decided to clear out the last remnants of Matt from my apartment. I couldn't stand to look at the wedding favors we'd picked out together, the framed photo of us on the shelf, or the stack of RSVP cards sitting on my desk. Claire helped me pack it all into a box labeled Matt's crap, which we left by the door for him to pick up, if I decided to tell him it was there. Do you want me to be here when he comes to get it? Claire asked as we finished taping the box shut. I don't think I want to see him, I admitted. But thank you. She gave me a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. You don't have to see him if you don't want to. You're calling the shots now. The idea of being in control again felt foreign but empowering. For the first time in days, I felt like I had a say in what happened next. The following morning, Matt showed up unannounced. I heard the knock at the door and froze, my stomach dropping. When I peeked through the peephole, there he was, standing on the other side, looking disheveled and anxious. Amy, he called out, knocking again. Please, just talk to me. My hand hovered over the doorknob, torn between slamming it in his face and giving him the closure I knew he didn't deserve. In the end, I cracked the door open just enough to glare at him through the gap. What do you want, Matt? His face softened with relief. I needed to see you. To apologize. I can't stop thinking about what I did, how badly I messed everything up. I folded my arms, leaning against the doorframe. You're a little late for that. I know, he said quickly. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. I stared at him, searching his face for any sign of sincerity. And maybe he really was sorry. But it didn't matter anymore. I hope you mean that, I said finally. Because you're not getting another chance to prove it. His shoulders sagged, his mouth opening and closing as if he wanted to argue. But in the end, he nodded. Your stuff's by the door, I said, nodding toward the box. He glanced down at it, then back at me. That's it? That's all I get to say? You've already said enough, Matt, I replied, my voice calm but firm. This is goodbye. Before he could respond, I shut the door and locked it, leaning my forehead against the wood as I listened to his footsteps retreat down the hall. It was over. For real this time. The first few days after Matt walked out of my life felt strange, like waking up in someone else's reality. I moved through them in a daze, going through the motions of everyday life while my mind grappled with the enormity of what had just happened. The wedding that wasn't. The future that was no longer. The man who had betrayed me in a way I couldn't have imagined. My parents checked in often, their concern palpable even through the phone. Mom offered to come and stay with me, but I declined. Claire was practically living at my apartment already, and besides, I needed to learn how to stand on my own feet again. On the third day, I finally worked up the courage to open my laptop and face the things I'd been avoiding, canceling vendors, notifying the venue, and sending out an email to our guests. The email was short but straightforward. Dear friends and family. Due to unforeseen circumstances, our wedding has been cancelled. We deeply appreciate the effort and time many of you made to be part of this special day, and we're so sorry for any inconvenience. Thank you for your understanding and support during this time. With love, Amy. Hitting send felt like closing the door on one chapter of my life. It wasn't a pleasant feeling, but it was necessary. Afterward, I tackled the practicalities. The florist was understanding, the caterer slightly less so. The venue manager, a kind older woman named Margot, asked me gently if everything was okay. I gave her a polite, vague answer, and she didn't press. By the time I shut the laptop, exhaustion weighed heavily on me, but there was also a faint glimmer of relief. The threads tying me to that day, and to Matt, were slowly unraveling. Claire came over later that night with a pizza and a six-pack of soda. She dropped the box on the coffee table and flopped onto the couch beside me. Okay, she said, we need a distraction. Something to take your mind off all this. Like what? I asked, taking a slice of pizza and biting into it mechanically. Anything, she said. A new hobby, a road trip, maybe even revenge. I raised an eyebrow. Revenge? She shrugged, a mischievous glint in her eye. I'm just saying, we could egg his car. Despite myself, I laughed, a real laugh, the kind I hadn't felt in days. As tempting as that sounds, I think I'll pass. Suit yourself, she said, grinning. But seriously, Amy. You need something to help you move forward. She wasn't wrong. I'd spent the past few days drowning in what-ifs and could-have-beens. It was time to start thinking about the future, my future. I don't know, I admitted. Everything feels different now. Like I don't even know who I am anymore. Claire leaned back against the cushions, her expression softening. You're still you, Amy. You're just figuring out who you are without him. And trust me, that version of you is going to be amazing. That conversation stuck with me long after Claire had left. Later that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about all the things I'd put on hold for Matt. Dreams I'd deferred because they didn't fit into our shared vision of the future. Traveling. Taking art classes. Trying yoga even though I had the flexibility of a wooden plank. Little things that had seemed unimportant at the time but now felt like pieces of myself I wanted to rediscover. The next morning, I made a list. It wasn't anything grand or life-changing, just small goals that felt achievable. Take a weekend trip somewhere new. Sign up for that painting class I always wanted to try. Go to yoga at least once, and try not to embarrass myself. Reorganize the apartment. Do something spontaneous. It felt good to have something to focus on, even if it was just a list of small, personal victories. A week later, I crossed the first thing off. Claire and I packed an overnight bag and drove to a charming little town 2 hours away. It wasn't a grand adventure, but it was exactly what I needed, a change of scenery, a chance to breathe. We wandered through the cobblestone streets, poking around in antique shops and sampling pastries from the local bakery. Claire insisted on taking photos of me in front of every picturesque building, declaring it her mission to remind me how fabulous I looked when I wasn't weighed down by heartbreak. By the time we drove home, I felt lighter. Not healed, nowhere near it, but lighter. Matt texted me a few times in the weeks that followed. Apologies, mostly. Half-hearted attempts to explain himself or ask how I was doing. I didn't reply. He didn't deserve access to me anymore. Instead, I threw myself into my list. The painting class was a disaster, I was no Picasso, and my masterpiece ended up looking more like a toddler's finger painting, but it made me laugh. Yoga was awkward and humbling, but I left the studio with a sense of accomplishment. Slowly but surely, I was finding pieces of myself I'd thought I'd lost. And with each passing day, I felt a little stronger, a little braver, and a little more like the woman I was always meant to be. The weeks that followed felt like the gradual unfolding of a new life. The things that once reminded me of Matt, his cologne lingering on the spare pillow, the coffee mug he always used, began to fade. I rearranged the apartment, swapping out old decor for pieces that felt more to me. It was a quiet reclamation of my space, one room at a time. But grief has a way of creeping back in when you least expect it. One night, while reorganizing a closet, I found the box of wedding items I hadn't been able to part with. Tucked inside were the vows I'd written weeks ago, painstakingly drafted on cream-colored stationery. My hand hovered over them for a long moment before I picked them up and unfolded the paper. Matt, I had written, from the moment I met you, I knew you were the one I wanted to spend forever with. My chest tightened. I couldn't read further. The words felt like a cruel joke now, mocking the person I'd been, the person who'd believed in him, in us. Without thinking, I grabbed a lighter from the kitchen drawer and headed to the balcony. The night air was crisp, a soft breeze rustling the pages as I held them out in front of me. It felt dramatic, like something out of a movie, but I needed this. I needed to let go. The flame caught quickly, licking at the edges of the paper until the vows crumpled into ash. I watched as the embers floated away, disappearing into the darkness. It was freeing, in a way. Cathartic. The next day, I decided to tackle something harder, reaching out to people who deserved to know the truth. While most of my friends had quietly accepted the vague, the wedding's cancelled explanation, a few had pressed for more details. One of those people was Adam, Matt's best man. I hesitated before calling him. We'd always been friendly, but I wasn't sure where his loyalties lay. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that he might have known about Erica. That maybe, just maybe, he'd been complicit in covering for Matt. When he answered, his tone was warm, almost relieved. Amy. I've been meaning to call. How are you holding up? Hi, Adam, I said, my voice measured. I'm getting there. He hesitated. I'm so sorry about everything. Matt hasn't told me much, but I can guess it wasn't easy for you. I sighed. That's actually why I'm calling. I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Of course, he said immediately. Did you know? I asked, my voice trembling. About Erica? His silence was deafening. I'll take that as a yes, I said bitterly. Amy, wait, he said quickly. It's not what you think. I didn't know everything, I swear. I only found out about her a few weeks ago, and I told Matt to end it. I told him he was making the biggest mistake of his life. And yet you still stood beside him, ready to watch him marry me, I said, my voice hard. I thought he'd ended it, Adam said, his tone pleading. He told me he had, and I believed him. If I'd known what he was still doing, I never would have gone along with it. I wanted to believe him, but trust didn't come easily anymore. Well, now you know. And for the record, he didn't end it. Not until I caught him. Adam groaned. Amy, I'm so sorry. I can't even imagine how you're feeling. Yeah, well, I said, my voice tight, imagine planning to marry someone, only to find out they've been cheating on you with their ex. It's not a great feeling. He was quiet for a moment. If there's anything I can do, anything at all, just say the word. There's nothing you can do, I said, exhausted. But thanks, I guess. I ended the call and stared at the phone in my hand. Talking to Adam hadn't brought the closure I'd hoped for, but it solidified something I already knew. Matt had been lying to everyone, not just me. A few days later, while I was at a yoga class, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from an unknown number. Hi, Amy. This is Erica. Can we talk? I froze, staring at the screen. Of all the people I least wanted to hear from, she was at the top of the list. What could she possibly have to say? I debated ignoring it, but curiosity, and maybe a small dose of anger, got the better of me. Against my better judgment, I replied. What do you want? Her response came quickly. I just want to explain. Please, can we meet? A part of me wanted to delete the message and block her number. But another part, the part that had been wrestling with so many unanswered questions, was tempted. When I told Claire about it later, she was predictably horrified. You're not seriously considering meeting her, are you? She demanded. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe I need to. Maybe hearing it from her will help me move on. Claire crossed her arms, clearly displeased. Fine. But if you're going to do this, I'm coming with you. No way am I letting you face her alone. I nodded, grateful for her support. Okay. Let's do it. And just like that, the next chapter of this nightmare began. The cafe was quiet, the soft hum of conversation clinking cups filling the space as Claire and I walked in. My heart was pounding, each step feeling heavier than the last. Erica was already there, sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. She looked up as we approached, her expression a mixture of nerves and forced composure. Are you sure about this? Claire whispered as we neared the table. I nodded, though I wasn't sure at all. I need to hear what she has to say. Erica stood as we reached the table, offering a hesitant smile. Amy. Thanks for meeting me. I didn't return her smile. Instead, I motioned to the chair across from her and sat down, Claire taking the seat beside me. Let's get this over with, I said, folding my arms across my chest. Erica sat down slowly, her eyes darting to Claire before landing back on me. I guess I deserve that. She took a deep breath, then added, I don't really know where to start. How about the part where you slept with my fiancé? I said coldly. Her cheeks flushed, and she looked down at her mug. I know I hurt you, Amy. I never wanted to, but... But what? I interrupted. It just happened. You tripped and fell into bed with him? Claire snorted beside me, but Erica didn't look up. It wasn't like that, she said quietly. Then explain it to me, I said, my voice trembling. Make me understand how you could look at him, knowing he was engaged to me, and think that was okay. Erica hesitated, twisting the ring on her finger. It started months ago. He reached out to me, said he wanted to catch up. At first, it was just texts. Then we met for coffee, and I leaned forward, my anger rising. And what? You decided to rekindle the romance? She flinched at my tone but didn't deny it. It wasn't supposed to go that far. I swear. We just started talking about the past, and one thing led to another. My stomach churned, the knot in my chest tightening. Do you even feel guilty? I asked. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. Of course I do. I hate myself for what I've done. But, Amy, you have to know, Matt wasn't happy. I froze, the words cutting deeper than I expected. What are you talking about? Erica sighed, glancing at Claire nervously. He told me things weren't right between you two. That you were growing apart. I shook my head, disbelief washing over me. That's a lie. Things weren't perfect, but we were fine. At least, I thought we were. I didn't know that, she said softly. He made it sound like he was trapped. Like you didn't. Don't you dare, Claire snapped, leaning forward. Don't you dare try to blame Amy for this. Matt's a grown man who made his own choices. You both did. Erica's face flushed again, but she didn't argue. You're right, she admitted. I wasn't trying to excuse what I did. I thought you deserved to know the truth. I stared at her, my mind racing. Was that supposed to make me feel better? Knowing that Matt had spun lies about our relationship to justify his betrayal? You're telling me this like it changes anything, I said finally. It doesn't. The fact is, you knew he was engaged, and you didn't care. You helped him betray me. Tears filled Erica's eyes, but I felt no sympathy. I made a mistake, she said, her voice trembling. I wish I could take it back, but I can't. All I can do is say I'm sorry. For a moment, I didn't respond. The apology hung in the air, hollow and meaningless. Finally, I stood, pushing my chair back with more force than I intended. You're sorry? Great. Good for you. But that doesn't fix anything. It doesn't undo the damage you've done. Claire stood beside me, her glare sharp enough to cut. Come on, Amy. Let's go. As we turned to leave, Erica called out, wait. I paused, glancing over my shoulder. For what it's worth, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, he's not worth it. I learned that the hard way, too. I didn't respond. I just walked out of the cafe, Claire by my side, the words echoing in my mind. Back in the car, Claire turned to me, her face a mix of anger and concern. Are you okay? I nodded, though I wasn't sure it was true. I think I just needed to hear it. To know it wasn't in my head. She's pathetic, Claire muttered. Trying to shift the blame like that. Unbelievable. I didn't disagree, but part of me felt strangely lighter. Hearing Erica's version of events, twisted and self-serving as it was, had given me something I hadn't expected, clarity. Matt wasn't just a man who made a mistake. He was someone who lied, manipulated, and destroyed trust. And Erica? She was just another pawn in his selfish game. I wasn't the fool I'd thought I was. I was the one who got away. The morning after my meeting with Erica, I woke up feeling different. Not healed, not yet, but lighter, like I'd shed a layer of weight that had been pressing on my chest. I replayed her words in my mind, dissecting every lie Matt had told, every excuse she'd made. But for the first time, the memories didn't sting as much. They felt distant, like artifacts of someone else's life. Claire showed up around noon, unannounced as usual, holding a bag of donuts and 2 iced coffees. I figured you could use a victory breakfast, she said, plopping onto the couch. I raised an eyebrow. Victory? Over what? Over them, she said simply. You walked into that cafe like a boss, stared your ex-fiancé's mistress in the face, and left with your dignity intact. That's a win. I smiled faintly, but her words stuck with me. Maybe she was right. Maybe walking away from that mess wasn't just an ending, it was a new beginning. That afternoon, I took another step toward reclaiming my life. I booked a solo trip to a coastal town I'd always wanted to visit. It wasn't far, just a few hours by train, but it felt symbolic. Solo travel? Claire said when I told her. Look at you, all independent and adventurous. Let's not get carried away, I said with a laugh. It's just for the weekend. It's not just for the weekend, she said firmly. It's for you. And you deserve it. The trip turned out to be exactly what I needed. The town was charming, with cobblestone streets and brightly painted houses overlooking the water. I spent my days wandering through art galleries, sipping coffee at quaint little cafes, and watching the waves crash against the shore. One evening, as I sat on a bench overlooking the ocean, a woman in her 60s struck up a conversation with me. She was visiting from out of state, and we ended up talking for over an hour. When I mentioned my recent heartbreak, she gave me a knowing smile. You're braver than you think, she said. Walking away from something that doesn't serve you? That takes strength. Her words stayed with me long after the trip ended. When I returned home, I threw myself into my list with renewed energy. I signed up for a new round of painting classes, joined a hiking group, and even started volunteering at an animal shelter on weekends. One day, while cleaning out kennels, a scruffy terrier mix caught my eye. His name was Charlie, and he had a habit of tilting his head like he was trying to understand every word you said. He's a sweetheart, one of the staff members said. A little shy, but he warms up quickly. Before I knew it, I was filling out the adoption paperwork. Bringing Charlie home felt like adding a new chapter to my story, one filled with wagging tails and muddy paw prints. Matt tried to reach out again a few weeks later. I saw his name flash across my phone screen, and for a brief moment, I considered answering. But then I thought about everything I'd learned, about him, about myself, and hit decline. I didn't need closure from him anymore. I'd found it on my own. That evening, I sat on the balcony with Charlie curled up at my feet, the sunset painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but maybe that was the point. Sometimes the plans that fall apart lead you to the life you're meant to have. Months passed, and with each one, the cracks in my heart began to mend. I wasn't the same person I'd been before the wedding, that wasn't, but that was a good thing. I'd grown stronger, braver, and more certain of what I wanted, and what I didn't. Life had a funny way of filling in the empty spaces. Between my painting classes, hiking group, and newfound obsession with long walks with Charlie, my days were full. And for the first time, they felt like mine. One afternoon, while browsing a bookstore downtown, I bumped into someone I hadn't seen in years, Evan, an old college friend. He'd been the guy who could make anyone laugh, the one everyone wanted to be around. Amy, he said, his face lighting up when he saw me. Evan? I smiled, genuinely happy to see him. What are you doing here? I moved back a few months ago, he said, holding up a book about mountain climbing. Trying to keep up with my new hobby. We chatted for a while, catching up on life. He mentioned his recent move, and I told him about the chaos of the past year. I expected his sympathy, but instead, he said something that stuck with me. Well, it sounds like you dodged a bullet, he said. And now you're free to do whatever makes you happy. He was right. I was free. Evan and I started seeing more of each other after that. First, it was just coffee here and there, but soon it became dinners and hikes with Charlie tagging along. He was easy to be around, kind, funny, and refreshingly honest. There were no grand declarations or whirlwind moments. Just steady, quiet joy that made me feel safe and valued. One evening, as we sat on a park bench watching Charlie chase fireflies, Evan turned to me. You know, he said, I always had a thing for you in college. I laughed, caught off guard. What? Why didn't you say anything? He shrugged, grinning. You were always dating someone. And I wasn't about to ruin a good thing. Well, I said, leaning back, your timing is much better now. His smile softened, and he reached for my hand. Good. Because I really like this timing. Things with Evan felt different, healthy, easy. There was no rushing, no need to prove anything. We built something slowly, one day at a time, and it was better than anything I could have imagined. On the 1-year anniversary of the cancelled wedding, Claire came over with cupcakes and a bottle of champagne. I thought this called for a celebration, she said, popping the cork with dramatic flair. What exactly are we celebrating? I asked, laughing. You, she said, raising her glass. The fact that you turned the worst day of your life into the best thing that ever happened to you. I thought about everything that had happened since that day, the heartbreak, the rebuilding, the discovery of a life I never would have chosen but had grown to love. She was right. It was worth celebrating. To new beginnings, I said, clinking my glass against hers. Later that night, as I stood on the balcony with Charlie at my feet and Evan's arm around my shoulders, I thought about the life I'd built from the ashes of the one I'd lost. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the one I'd planned. But it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly, deeply happy.